welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are my favorite cards in the format, essentially. These are my pet cards, I guess you could say. A lot of people have asked me, what my personal pet cards are, the cards that I like to put in all my decks. Now, obviously, the stuff like the, Beast Within or, stuff that you would normally put in a deck anyway because it's removal or it's ramp or something like that. Those cards are sort of obvious that you would put them in every deck. I'm not going to talk about anything like that. I'm going to talk about the stuff that is cards that I just really like, that I try to shoehorn in all my decks because I really like what they're doing. I think they fit in a lot of different strategies. It's always important to synergize with what you're doing in your deck already, but these are cards that I will definitely put in my deck if they synergize, but I will also try to put in even if they don't synergize because I just really like these cards and I try to play them in as many decks as I can. I'll give an honorable mention. I'll just start out with Eternal Witness. This has been one of my favorite cards since forever, since I first cracked it open in a pack way back in 5th Dawn. It really doesn't need to be on any list because I think it's just such a fantastic card in the Commander format. It's just been a staple in Magic in general forever. I think it's maybe the best creature in the game. That's just my personal opinion. There's very few cards in the format that I really, really look forward to seeing when I pull it off the top late in the game. I mean, there are very few cards that I would rather have. Like, you're on turn 12, the game's not going great for you, you're empty-handed, you pull an Eternal Witness off the top, all of a sudden your graveyard becomes your hand. It's just such a fantastic card. Obviously, though, I don't think it even deserves a mention because everyone already knows what a great card it is. And it's hard to have, that's like saying, Rhystic Study is a pet card of mine or Smothering Tithe is a pet card of mine. It's not really a pet card. It's a fantastic card that you're going to put in a deck no matter what. The rest of the cards on this list are cards that, a lot of people might scratch their head at a little bit because they are kind of specific, but I really like to put them in decks whenever I can. And you would be surprised. It's a little bit of, you'd be surprised how good these cards are. So starting out with number 10 is Coveted Jewel. 6-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. That's fantastic. And it taps to add 3 mana of any color. That's also fantastic. But whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attacks you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of Coveted Jewel and untaps it. So that's not great. Now, I'll first say, I have yet to give this to anybody, okay? I have this in a couple of decks. I have never donated it to anybody, right? That last ability that triggers whenever a creature attacks and isn't blocked, I've never had that happen. Okay, now, that maybe I just got lucky. Obviously, that situation can arise. I have this in my Gerard deck. That was an absolute no-brainer to put it in that deck because I can sacrifice my own artifacts. So it ever gets to the situation where maybe my opponent will get this, I just sacrifice it so that they don't gain control of it. Easy peasy. Also have recursion there. The next card on this list, actually, I can get it back, draw 3 more cards. So it's even better that way. And, it is kind of specific. I put it at number 10, even though I like this card a lot. I put it at number 10 because it's just such a unique, interesting card. And it's also really fun in a Commander game, I think. People like the Monarchy a lot in Commander games. This is like a Monarchy on steroids, right? You can start passing around the table. People are drawing, getting the mana, and you can get it back, right? Even if you're in a deck where you want to draw lots, you can let your opponent have this and then get it back from the next turn, and you get to draw 3 cards. So it's a great way to get lots of draw as well. So I just think it's a really fun card in a Commander game and can be fantastic in the right situations. Coming in at number 9 of my personal favorite cards is Goblin Welder, and I already alluded to this a little bit. And again, it's in my Gerard deck, works fantastically with Coveted Jewel. What a great combo, because you can just swap it out, right? When someone's about to maybe possibly gain control of Coveted Jewel, you swap it out with the Goblin Welder, and then you get it back the next turn, draw more cards. It's just great that way. It's such fantastic value. Just a 1-mana creature comes down, hits the table, and you can just swap out anything. And the wording is really important right here, right? You tap, choose target artifact a player controls, and target artifact in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as the ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. So it is a sacrifice effect, and it is target player. So you can also use this on your opponents. I was playing a game with my patrons a couple of weeks back, and one of my patrons had a Darksteel Forge in play, and I swapped out that Darksteel Forge for a mana rock that they had in their graveyard. So it is also a fantastic removal option for artifacts as well. You would be shocked. You know, I know it seems like, oh, I'm going to put this in a red artifact deck and that's it. No, you can use it for so much more than that. I also have this in my Azmoran deck because I'm making food tokens. And what I can do there is I can discard, because it's a discard theme, I can discard an artifact into my graveyard, make a food token, and then use my Goblin Welder to swap the food token for the artifact that I just discarded. I think there's a lot of great ways to use this card. It's a super fun, interesting card in a commander game, again, because you can use it on your opponents as well. So really great card. One of my favorite cards of all time, I think. Coming in at number 8 is Luminous Broodmoth. 2 white, insect, 3/4 with flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. You know, honestly, I was not as high on this as a lot of people were when it first came out. I thought it was good, but once you actually start playing with it, right, it's one of those cards that once you have it in a deck and you start actually playing with it, you realize how great it is. And it's a super good value card. And I love value cards where you're basically getting double use out of a lot of your creatures, assuming they don't have flying. A lot of people thought this should have been a legendary creature when it came out. And I think that, you know, Wizards of the Coast probably realized the same thing that I think, which is this is just way too good. Having this ability stapled on your commander, it would be way too easy to go infinite. You could just throw a Solemnity in your deck and go infinite with it. It would be too busted, I think, as a commander. Even in mono white, I think having this ability staple on a commander is too good. I put this in as many decks as I can. I have it in, I think, both my mono white decks, just because it's just such incredible value. Both of my commanders for my mono white decks don't have flying. So at the very least, it's you get your commander back. It's a free resurrection for your commander where, you know, I'm playing my patron of the Kitsune deck. It's a pretty pricey commander, and if someone kills it, now it just comes back into play, and now it has flying. It's an added bonus. Now I have my commander back. I don't have to pay the commander tax and everything else, and then it has flying on top of all of that. This card you could just put in a lot of decks. You know, it works really good with what it's doing. If you're in an ETB strategy or an aristocrat sacrifice strategy, anything like that, it's phenomenal, but you really could just put it in almost any deck and it'd be great. Really great card. I also really like the art. Coming in at number 7, Momentous Fall. 2 green instant. As additional cost, you cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. You draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. You gain life equal to its toughness. So, I mean, I don't know if there's any common theme. Maybe someone can tell me below if they see a common theme with all these cards, because I'm really all over the place here with regards to color and what these cards are doing. Just stuff that I guess maybe value. Is value a common thread here? I'm a big fan of value in the game. I think that's really where it's at in a commander game, is just getting value out of the things you're doing. That's why when a card is a one-shot, and I talk about this a lot, a one-shot like Momentous Fall, I want to get a lot of value out of it. And if your commander is a 5/5 or a 6/6 or something, that's exactly what you're going to get, right? 4 mana, I draw 6 cards and gain 6 life is fantastic at instant speed especially, right? The instant speed is, for me, what makes this one of my favorite cards. If this is a sorcery, I probably would have it in maybe 1 deck. I think I have it in 3 decks right now because I just love, you know, my opponent's going to kill my commander anyway, so why not pay 4 mana and draw a bunch of cards and gain life? I have some decks with some really expensive commanders, and I also have my Shanna. This is in my Shanna deck as well. My Shanna's not an expensive commander. It's actually pretty cheap, but this doesn't care about the mana value. It cares about power and toughness, and my Shanna ends up getting really big in that deck. It'll be like a 7/7, and I'll sacrifice it with Momentous Fall, draw 7 cards, gain 7 life. Just a fantastic fit there. Again, a card that I would probably put in almost any green deck, because at the very least, my opponent's about to kill my commander. I can sacrifice it and get a ton of value out of it because it's going to die anyway. Coming in at number 6, and this one's pretty obscure, and the next 3 in a row here all have a common theme, as you'll see. Pull from Eternity. 1 white mana instant. Put target face-up card that's exiled into its owner's graveyard. I love versatility in cards too. That's a big thing for me. In a commander game, I love cards that are going to give me lots of value and cards that are versatile, because you just never know what your opponents are going to be doing and you want to be ready for everything. And this card, even though it doesn't look like much, is one of the most versatile cards in the entire format, in my opinion. So first of all, you're using it on either you or your opponents, right? That's an important thing here. So let's start with us. We're going to use this on us, and I'll just throw out a couple scenarios here. In my Dennick deck, I have this. Okay, why do I have this in my Dennick deck? Because when Dennick dies, he goes to exile. Okay, and if I have a pull from Eternity in my hand, rather than I send him to the command zone, then I have to cast him again, then I have to have him die again, then I have to disturb him again to get that flip side. Now I can just let him go into exile. Okay, if Dennick dies, I let him go to exile. 1 mana, I throw him back in my graveyard, and now I can just disturb him again, and I don't have to jump through all those hoops. It's a fantastic fit there. An absolute auto-include in an Oscar deck, I think. If you have an Oscar deck, and I know a lot of people do, you're exiling those artifacts from your graveyard. So now you can just, for 1 mana, you know, something you want to reuse again, you just chuck it back in your graveyard, which is where you want it, right? This is extra good in a deck where I want stuff in my graveyard that I can exile again from my graveyard. So now I can throw it back in my graveyard, whatever that artifact is, and reuse it again with my Oscar's ability. In any deck where you just have a really important piece that you know, if your opponent exiles it, you're just screwed. This is a way around it, right? I have a patron with a Sakashima and Ravos Grandeur deck, and he got screwed the other day when we were playing. He got a Rakdos Charm on his graveyard, and both his Lanessa and his Korlosh were in his graveyard at the time, so they both got exiled. He's completely screwed. He has lots of ways to get them out of the graveyard, obviously. That's how you would build that deck. I don't know if he's got Pull from Eternity in there, but I hope he puts it in there for that situation, because now he can just put one of them, at the very least, back into his graveyard so that he's not completely screwed, right? So it's just a great card for that. Can also be used on your opponents, okay? Put target face-up exiled card into its owner's graveyard, okay? I also have this in my Sigrid deck, because my Sigrid comes into play. I exile that attacking creature that then goes to exile, and when Sigrid leaves play, now that's going to come back into play, unless it's in their graveyard, right? That is a face-up card that's in exile. So if I exile something, now I can pay 1 mana and put it into their graveyard, so that when my Sigrid gets bounced or removed in some way, they don't get their creature back because it's in the graveyard, right? They're in a rune deck, they blink their creature, and rather than getting it back on the end step, you pay 1 mana and put it in their graveyard so they don't get it back. They have a suspended card, right? So now your opponent's playing a Joyra deck. They have some giant Eldrazi in exile that has time counters on it that are getting removed. It's going to come into play. It's going to run you over. You pay 1 mana and stick it in their graveyard instead, right? So there's just so many ways to use this card. I love it a lot. I'm not going to harp on it anymore. I'm going to talk about it in my 10 cards videos when I eventually get to it, where I will continue my rant on how great this card is and how many different ways you can use it in a commander game. But moving on to number 5, which is Vanish into Memory, and very similar to Pull from Eternity, where there's just so many different ways you can use it, and that's why I love it so much. 2, a white and a blue instant. Exile target creature. You draw cards equal to the creature's power. At the beginning of your next upkeep, return the cards to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to the creature's toughness. So there's just so much going on here that I love. And again, going over all of the options that you can use this card for is just, we don't have enough time for that. I mean, I guess I could talk about it all day, but you guys probably don't want to hear that. I'll just give you some of the scenarios that I've used it in, and some of the decks I've used it in. I used to have a Temet deck, okay? And I had this in my Temet deck for a reason, a couple of reasons. The main reason is because it was a token theme. So if you exile a token with this, right, you're going to exile the creature, draw cards equal to its power, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you return it to play, and you're going to discard cards. If that creature doesn't come back into play, you don't discard anything. So if I even exile like a Beast Within token, right? Someone has Beast Within somebody's thing. They have that 3/3 Beast token. This can become 4 mana. I exile their creature, which is already good. Exiling their creature is a good thing. You get to draw 3 cards, and it doesn't come back into play, so you don't have to discard anything. If you want to discard stuff, like sometimes you want to discard, so it can be good in that theme as well, where maybe you want to be putting stuff into your graveyard, but it's extra good in I can exile my opponent's token creature. they lose their creature. I don't have to discard anything because it never comes back into play. I also put it in my Temet deck because it works great in a blink strategy, which that deck was. It was a little bit of a blink strategy where now I can exile my creature, like my Cloud Blazer, for example. I just want the draw effect, right? So I exile it, I draw a couple cards, it does come back into play, and I get to draw, I get the trigger off of my Cloud Blazer. I do have to discard a couple cards, but at the end of the day, I'm up as well. You can also use this to save a creature. My commander's about to die, I exile it, draw a bunch of cards. You know, even if your commander has the same power and toughness, you're going to draw, say, 5 cards and then discard 5 cards. That's pretty good. Saved your commander. I think that's totally worth it. So you can use it in the way it probably was intended, I think, which is you just draw a certain amount of cards and then discard a certain amount of cards. That's always good. Looting is good. Another great way to use this card, similar to the token theme, is exiling creatures with +1/+1 counters on it. I did this a few weeks ago to another patron of mine we were playing, where he had a giant Hydra in play with a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it. Had a 0 power and toughness without the counters, so I exiled it on their turn, drew a bunch of cards, and then on my turn, it comes back into play. It's a 0 power creature and a 0 toughness creature, so I don't have to discard anything, and also their creature instantly dies and goes to the graveyard. So it's just such a versatile card. There's such a plethora of ways to use this card where you're doing lots of drawing, you're exiling creatures, you can use it for blinking, you can use it for saving your own creatures, you can use it for getting rid of your opponent's creatures. Even worst case scenario, my opponent is about to smack me with their giant, Blightsteel Colossus, I can just exile it temporarily, and that's it. It comes back into play, but at least I'm not dead. At least it can even be used to save your life in a way. And then also I get to loot a whole ton of cards and try to look for a permanent answer to that Blightsteel Colossus. So just a great card, super versatile. But even more versatile is my number 4 card, I think, which is Release to the Wind. 2 in a blue instant. Exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it without paying its mana cost. And again, just like the last 2 cards, the reason I love this card so much is because it can be used on anyone's permanent, on yours or your opponent's. Again, just like all the stuff I said with Vanish into Memory, a lot of it applies here where I can just get that Blightsteel Colossus off the table temporarily so it doesn't kill me. They can just cast it again. They have to do it at, the appropriate speed, right? So casting it for free, fine, but they have to do it on their second main phase. Timing restrictions do apply here, so that is important. I've used this card before where my opponent had a Winter Orb on the table, and I exile their Winter Orb on their end step, so that on my turn, all my lands on tap. They can't cast it right away. They have to wait until their next turn before they can cast their Winter Orb, right? Because they have to do it at sorcery speed, obviously. So it gets the Winter Orb off the table for an entire turn cycle. So it's a great way to get something off the table temporarily. I also use this in my Tishana deck because I got cards like Mystic Snake in there where I can cast them with Flash. So now this becomes a counterspell. My Mystic Snake is already in play. I Release to the Wind it, right? My opponent casts an Expropriate or something I really want to counter. I cast Release to the Wind on my Mystic Snake. It gets exiled, and then I immediately cast it again because it has Flash. It comes into play. It's free, right? I don't have to pay the mana cost. It comes back into play, and I can counter that Expropriate. It's great there. Again, so it's great for getting a blink effect. Again, with the Cloud Blazer, I can exile my Cloud Blazer, and then I cast it for free, and I get to draw some cards. Also good for cast triggers, right? Unlike the Vanish into Memory, where I'm only getting the ETB, this is actually a cast. So if I have an Ulamog in play, I can exile my own Ulamog and then cast it again on my turn for free and get the cast triggers, and I actually get to exile those 2 permanents. So it's extra good there. I think it's a fantastic fit in like a Maelstrom Wanderer deck. I think it's probably an auto include for me in a Maelstrom Wanderer deck because, again, I'm getting the cast triggers. I can exile my own Maelstrom Wanderer, and then when I cast it again, I get those cascade triggers. So it's just a phenomenal card that way. I can instant speed get rid of a problem off the table. I can get an extra cast trigger. I can get an extra ETB trigger. I can just save my commander, right? There's a board wipe. I exile my own commander, stick it in exile, and just leave it there and just cast it at my leisure, right? This is cast it for as long as it remains exiled. Just like with a Praetor's Grasp, I can just stick something in exile and just leave it there until I feel like casting it at whenever it's convenient for me. I just think this is such a versatile, fantastic card. I love it. I try to put it in as many decks as I can. Coming in at number 3 is Thematic Compass. And again, this is another card that originally I wasn't that high on. And man, you start putting it in decks and you're just like, wow, this is so fantastic. 2-mana artifact, pay 3 and tap, search your library for basic land card and reveal it. Put it into owner's hand, then shuffle your library. And that's just a Journeyer's Kite, right? A Journeyer's Kite was used in Commander quite a bit back in the day for those colors that didn't, search for lands very easily. It's a colorless option to go get lands out of your deck so you can get those land drops. So this is doing that. So it's fantastic in a deck where you want those land drops. And any deck that isn't green might run into troubles, getting those land drops. So it's a great include for any deck that's doing that, which for me is, that's a lot of decks. And I'm putting this in all those decks because on top of all of that, at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you transform it and it turns into Spires of Araska, which is a land and taps to add a colorless mana, which you're probably never going to use because it also taps to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So it turns into a Maze of Ith, which of course is a fantastic card in the format, but it's also a Maze of Ith that taps for mana. So it's never going to be completely useless. Not that a Maze of Ith is completely useless, but a lot of times a Maze of Ith is sitting there and you can't tap it for mana. So it's a better Maze of Ith, right? This card is a better Maze of Ith and a better Journeyer's Kite. It's both of those cards in one, but better versions of both. I love the fact that, you don't get the Maze of Ith right away, but you don't really need it right away, do you? It flips over when you have 7 or more lands in play, and that's good enough for me. That's usually when you're going to want a Maze of Ith type of effect. Early in the game, it's not going to be great for you. So early in the game, I'm going and getting lands out of my deck. I'm getting those land drops. I'm thinning out my deck, which a lot of people like. And then later in the game, when I don't need the lands, now it turns into something that's going to be way more useful for me. I just love this card. I've been shoehorning it into as many decks as I can. It was one of those cards that in the beginning I threw in one deck. I actually made a Zerta deck back maybe, I guess, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I've put this in because I thought, okay, well, I only have to pay 1 to activate that search your library ability, which is great in a Zerta deck. But also, once I started actually using it and seeing how useful it was and how it turned into a Maze of Ith, I was just like, man, I got to start putting this in more decks. And I eventually put it into a lot of, I don't know how many decks I have it in now, but it's a lot. Coming in at number 2 is the Immortal Sun, 6 mana legendary artifact. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and creatures you control get +1/+1. This card is doing so much that I often forget about the other stuff. Now, for me, for anyone who is a regular viewer of my channel, you will probably know I don't like Planeswalkers, and I don't play Planeswalkers, and most people will say that's the only downside of this card, is that you can't activate the loyalty abilities of the Planeswalkers you control. And when they first made this card, I'm sure they thought that. I'm sure they thought, okay, well, there's a bunch of great stuff going on here, but the downside is you can't play Planeswalkers. Well, guess what, folks? I don't play them anyway. So there is zero downside to this card for me. And when this card first came out, I just got super excited about it. And I hadn't been playing Commander for very long. And man, in the beginnings of playing Commander, I had to put up with all those Atraxa Super Friends decks, which were everywhere in the format when I first started playing. And so when I saw this, as you can imagine, my eyes just lit up. I got as many copies as I could right away. It went into as many decks as I could shoehorn into. I actually have it in less decks than I used to. I put this in all my decks. In the beginning, I hated Planeswalkers so much in the format that I just put this in all my decks. And that's why I put it in all my decks. The other stuff was just added bonus for me. The fact that it shut down Planeswalkers is why I was putting it in all my decks. Took it out of a few. I don't have it in as many decks as I used to. Those Atraxa Super Friends decks I don't run into nearly as much as I used to. I play this now more so for the extra draw and the Anthem effect, and my spells cost 1 less. And the Planeswalkers loyalty ability thing I forget about. And I'll have it in play, and this has happened in a couple games to me recently where it's like, oh yeah, it also shuts down my opponent's Planeswalkers. I forgot about that. So it's kind of funny how originally I started putting it on my decks for the shutting down Planeswalkers thing, and now I sort of forgot about it. It's just added bonus. For someone who doesn't play Planeswalkers, it's just kind of a no-brainer to be putting this in as many decks as you can. I have it in at least 5 decks right now, probably. I just love it. Mostly, I have fond memories of it because it shuts off Planeswalkers, and there's not a lot of cards like that in the game. So, in fact, this is really the only card that actually shuts off Planeswalkers. There's a couple that hate on them a little bit, but this is the only card in the entire game that shuts off Planeswalkers, and that's why I love it so much. But coming in at number 1 for me has got to be Bane of Progress. And as I was making this list, I was thinking it is sort of a commander staple already. I mean, it is a commander staple. It's not sort of a commander staple. So I wasn't even sure if I should put it on the list at all. And then I thought, okay, well, I got to give it a mention. And then as I was figuring out where everything fell on this list, it kept getting bumped up and bumped up. It's sort of like Eternal Witness, where if I had actually put Eternal Witness on this list, it would be number 1. But I didn't actually put it on the list because it's sort of a commander staple anyway. So I don't even know if this should even be mentioned. Maybe this should have been an honorable mention, but the fact that it's on the list made it number 1. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but this is like one of my favorite cards in the entire format, without a question. There are actually people that don't play this card. I've played against people who had green decks, and some guy's going off with his enchantment deck or his artifact deck, and I'm like, hey man, you got a Bane of Progress in there? He's like, no, actually I don't. I'm like, wow, really? For me, it's an auto include. In a green deck, it is an auto include. I don't even care if I'm doing lots of artifacts or lots of enchantments. And I don't really care about the put a +1/+1 counter on it for each permanent destroyed this way. By the way, if you haven't seen this card before, 4 green elemental 2/2, when it enters the battlefield, you destroy all artifacts and enchantments and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each permanent destroyed this way. That part I don't even care about that much. Most of the time I'll play my Bane of Progress, and obviously, like I've said many times, when you're casting those board wipe type of effects, you want to get as much value out of it as you can. So I want to at least destroy 5 or 6 things, even if that includes my stuff. Typically my opponents, though, you're not getting a lot of value out of it if you destroy your own stuff. I don't care so much about the +1/+1 counters. Even though my Bane of Progress is often going to be like a 10/10 or a 12/12, I don't even care. And my opponents are like, oh, we got to get that off the table. I'm like, I don't care. Go ahead. Use your swords to plowshares on it if you want to. I don't give a hoot because I've already done. It's done. It's what it needs to do, right? I absolutely love this card because it shuts down so many decks. And a lot of people I found early in the beginnings of playing this format really liked the explosive start and aha, look at all the things I'm doing. And then I come around with my Bane of Progress and destroy it all. And it was such a fulfilling play that's for me what made me love this card so much. Was all the people that sort of wanted to show off, hey, look at all the stuff I'm doing. And I'm emptying my hand onto the table, and then I'm like, okay, Bane of Progress, you got nothing. It felt good, and also it was just such a fantastic value play. I love value plays, and I cast my 6-mana creature and destroy 8 or 10 or 12 things on the table. That's just incredible value, right? That beats the hell out of any draw spell, in my opinion, because I'm just getting so many things off my opponent's board for 1 card out of my hand. That's incredible card advantage, I think. It's always going to be a huge blowout, a Bane of Progress. It always is. I've never had this card in my hand and go, oh, Bane of Progress, that's not very good. That's never happened. I don't know if there's ever been a Commander game in history where a Bane of Progress hasn't been incredible value or incredible card advantage, because there's always going to be, at the very least, lots of mana rocks. Maybe there's a Rhystic Study and a Smothering. If you can hit a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe with your Bane of Progress, that alone, and then on top of all the mana rocks you're hitting, that alone makes it worth it, right? And then on top of that, there's my opponent's playing their enchantment tribal deck where they're just completely ruined, or their artifact tribal deck, or they have, whatever kind of artifact token theme that has been blowing up in the format lately that I'm absolutely destroying them. And then on top of that, in my Tishana deck, that's a blink strategy where I can reuse this. Again, any ability stapled on creatures is always going to be way, way better. So you can blink it, you can resurrect it out of your graveyard and use it again. It's just such a fantastic card. It's probably my favorite card in the entire format, I think. But that is it. That is my 10 pet cards, I guess you could say, are my 10 favorite cards in the format. Outside of I'm a huge removal guy, and I didn't put really, I guess Bane of Progress is sort of a removal card. So, and Goblin Welder can technically be a removal card, and Release to the Wind can be technically a removal card. So I kept removal off of this list. If I was talking about my actual favorite cards in the format, I think I probably would put like Beast Within or Generous Gift on here, because I really love versatile removal as well. I love versatile cards. I love removal. I love being able to deal with what my opponents are doing, which a lot of the cards on this list do. But these are just 10 cards that for me are just personal favorites that I try to put in as many decks as I can, because a lot of times they're just fun, interesting cards. A lot of versatility here as well. But what are your pet cards? What is that card that you just like to shoehorn in as many decks as you can, just because you think it's a really good card in a commander game, or a fun and interesting card, or a really versatile card that can help you out in a lot of different situations, no matter what your opponents are doing, right? Let me know in the comments below, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.